Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. The European Union has postponed the imposition of its 19th package of sanctions, but apparently because it wants them tougher. On the table are stricter limits on Russian tourist visas and restrictions to diplomats' movement. As we go on air tonight, these are our top stories. Polish Prime Minister says deal on new submarines to be signed by the end of the year. Italian court orders extradition of the man suspected of blowing up Nordstream pipelines. And a young couple triggers alarm as they attempt to fly a drone over government premises in Warsaw. The European Union has delayed proposals for new sanctions against Russia, including possible restrictions on tourist visas. This comes as President Trump pressures Europe to do more to hit Russia's war chest. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels for us and has more. Good evening, Alex. So, is this delay a sign of more dithering in Brussels?
Good evening, Claudia. Well, on the face of it, it may seem that way, but as you said in your introduction, there is something behind this delay. We understand from officials behind the scenes that there is coordination with other partners to make these sanctions stronger. I want to bring you comments from Poland's Deputy Foreign Minister here in Brussels at a meeting of EU ministers just earlier today. Ignacy Niemczyński was here, asked about what the delay was about. This was his answer.
Our hope is that the package will be even stronger, so we're looking forward to having this discussion, and the delay is, from our perspective, only caused by the intention to make it stronger.
So, I hope that the delay will only make it stronger. That's also what we've heard from sources speaking to TVP World in the last few hours as to why this has been delayed. Now, looking at a time frame, we expect it may be proposed by the Commission early next week. But as always with Brussels, these things could change. And as I also mentioned, Claudia, there's another reason for this delay, and that is better coordination with other international partners. Of course, we saw Donald Trump in the last few days pressuring NATO countries, including those EU countries, to stop buying Russian oil, to put more pressure on Russia for the US to then follow suit. That is what we heard from Marta Koss, the EU's Enlargement Commissioner.
Our goal is also that we continue working with our international partners, not just G7, to put pressure on Russia to end this war.
So stronger sanctions and more coordination with international partners, including the United States and other G7 countries. Well, let's break down what is in this 19th package of sanctions. A lot of it is anti-circumvention, tightening the bolts of the existing sanctions to make sure it's harder for Russia to circumvent them, adding more ships from Russia's shadow fleet onto the list of those sanctions and making sure that those previous sanctions are effective. But there is one big ticket item that you mentioned again in your introduction, Claudia, of the restrictions on tourist visas for Russian nationals. Now, that will be a proposal by the European Commission. It still has to go through the member states. But if those sanctions are agreed, we could see a reduction of the influx of Russian tourists, like we've seen in the last few months across Europe, coming in to the European Union. But as I said, this is still just at the proposal stage because it will have to have unanimity among all member states. And as usual with European sanctions, all eyes will be on Hungary. We will see that proposal in the next few days, perhaps next week. Then the debate is whether or not they can get through. But clearly there is a desire from all European Union member states to continue to put more pressure on Russia and hope that the US will follow suit. Claudia.
Thank you, Alex. That was Alex Cadier reporting live from Brussels. Two European capitals in one day. That was Polish President Karol Nawrocki's diplomatic agenda on Tuesday. The result? Nawrocki renewed his call for World War II reparations for Poland from Germany, reparations he believes could finance the Polish military industry. But has anything concrete been achieved so far? Sonia Gata-Biszczan joins me now from Paris to discuss the Polish president's tour of Paris and Berlin. Good evening, Sonia. Has anything concrete been achieved during President Nawrocki's visit to Berlin and Paris? Can you fill us in on it?
Good evening, Claudia. Looking at the agenda of President Karol Nawrocki, meetings with heads of state in Berlin and Paris, it seems to have been a busy day. But looking at the deliverables, it is less clear what has been accomplished, particularly in the context that there have been no joint press conferences with the heads of state. So nobody could speak to these accomplishments. What we do know, as you mentioned, was Karol Nawrocki's call for reparations. He's been talking about it even prior to the visit. He also mentioned this in his own press conference that happened just an hour ago or so. He's been talking about reparations for a while, but on Tuesday, today, he mentioned a new angle in whereby Germany could support and finance Poland's security.
I suggested that we could move towards a solution of financing Poland's arms industry and military capabilities. This would be the first step in a long process. It's not a finished plan, but it's a proposal for Germany to start paying reparations, thereby strengthening the Polish army and its military capabilities, while bolstering NATO's eastern flank, something we all care about.
According to the German government, the issue of reparations has been legally closed. This is also the view of some Polish politicians. In fact, also the former Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, who served during the Law and Justice of the former government, conservative government, who historically was in favor of reparations, he even said that raising this issue of reparations could be contrary to Polish national interests.
Demanding to be treated differently from the other countries of the anti-Hitler coalition is not in accordance with the principles of justice. At the same time, questioning the Potsdam decisions, which constitute the foundation of the post-war international order, is contrary to Poland's national interest. For if we question the decisions regarding reparations, it will be more difficult for us to defend the decisions concerning territorial issues.
Experts warn that given the regional security context, particularly following the Russian drone incursion into Polish airspace last week, there are topics to discuss beyond reparations.
This is obviously a long-running theme in Polish-German relations. I think the Germans have been very clear that they believe this issue is settled. They do not want to discuss it. I think so. If the meeting gets weighed down by this issue, I don't think it's a good sign. But there are other issues to discuss: the transatlantic relationship, Russia. Nawrocki was just in Washington at the White House.
As a reminder, following the Russian drone violation of the Polish airspace last week, both France and Germany have stepped up in their security commitments towards Poland and towards NATO. France sent 3 Rafale fighter jets, and Germany doubled on Eurofighter jets patrolling Polish airspace, going from 2 to 4. Speaking after the drone incursion, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that it's probably best not to look for an enemy in the West, as the one in the East is enough. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. That was Sonia Gatabiszczan reporting live from Paris. Moving to Italy, a court in the city of Bologna has approved the extradition of a Ukrainian suspect in the mysterious sabotage of the Nordstream pipelines in the Baltic Sea. His arrest comes after 3 years of investigation by German prosecutors. Russia accuses Ukraine, while Ukraine denies any involvement, though experts say many questions remain about the attack. Anastasia Yanchenko investigated the case.
This video, 2 weeks old, shows the arrest of a Ukrainian man identified as Serhiy K. in Italy. He is suspected of involvement in the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. 3 years after the gas pipelines linking Russia to Germany were blown up, the man is expected to be extradited to Germany, following a decision by Italy's Bologna court on Tuesday. His defense says they plan to appeal to Italy's highest court.
Fundamental rights, fair trial, detention conditions, functional immunity cannot be sacrificed in the name of automatic judicial cooperation.
The suspect was a part of a group, allegedly mostly from Ukraine, who planted devices on the pipelines near the Danish island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea.
Serhiy K. was part of a group of people who, in September 2022, placed explosive devices on the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines near the island of Bornholm. The suspect was likely one of the coordinators of the operation.
Theoretically, the destruction of the pipelines may have benefited Ukraine, as they had long served Russian interests by making Europe dependent on cheap Russian gas.
In a defensive war that Ukraine is waging, it is acceptable, even according to international law, to attack enemy infrastructure, and Nord Stream has been or was enemy infrastructure definitely, because it was Russia that had been using energy as a weapon.
So far, no one has claimed responsibility for the blast, and Ukraine has denied any involvement. However, experts believe Russia could have deliberately carried out the explosion and blamed the Ukrainian authorities in order to worsen Europe's relations with the country.
It does play into the Kremlin's propaganda's cards, definitely, because they can pinpoint, look, Ukraine did that. We're not the only bad guy here.
However, there are many contradictions that experts say could indicate Russia was behind the blast.
The people who are alleged to have been on the boat, one Ukrainian is listed on a public list of Ukrainian traitors. Another one is currently living in Krasnodar, and she freely publishes on social media. Now, if you blow up a Russian pipeline, I suggest it's highly unlikely that you should be able to live freely and happily in a Russian city.
On the day of the attack, Russian vessels were near the blast site, while the boat, Andromeda, dubbed the Ukrainian sailboat by Russian propaganda, was hired near the Nordstream 2 construction facilities, raising questions about whether it could have been part of a broader Russian operation.
It's a cover for which the some parts of the German prosecutorial system seem to take seriously, but it looks very much like a cover.
Moscow had already suspended supplies through Nord Stream 1 during the Russian war in Ukraine before it was destroyed. Nord Stream 2 was never launched due to the Russian invasion and the resulting political disputes. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
One of the least developed branches of the Polish armed forces, the Navy, might finally see some progress. In its latest announcement, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said that Poland would strike a deal on submarines by the end of the year as part of the Orca program. TVP World's defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek reports.
The Polish government is set to imminently decide on the purchase of submarines as part of the Orca program. Poland currently possesses one submarine which is becoming largely obsolete, having had been used for the better part of the last 30 years. Since its inception, the Orca program, responsible for the purchase of 3 submarines, has faced significant delays. Initial signs that the program might finally see its completion came just a few weeks ago as the Polish armament group signed initial MOUs on the co-development of Polish submarine capabilities, namely with the Swedish producer Saab as well as the Italian producer Fincantieri. Now it seems that government is also taking this initiative seriously.
At the initiative of the Prime Minister, the government will announce its decision to launch the Orca program tomorrow. We have been waiting a long time for this. Tomorrow we will adopt a resolution committing to purchase submarines by the end of the year. I'm referring to the Orca program that has been talked about so much. The bids have been reviewed, and now the Polish government will decide who will be the program's partner.
But it's not just a question of submarines, as the entirety of the Navy is due for an upgrade and modernization. There is currently a pipeline of projects currently being underway, with the first ships set to set sail on the Baltic Sea as early as 2029. This is something that has been highlighted by the commander associated with the Polish Naval Academy, Dariusz Bugalski.
The state of our Navy, of course, raises our concern. I think it concerns everyone who wears a Navy uniform. We're eagerly awaiting progress and new projects. The most important one currently underway, and it's hard to imagine it ending in failure, is the construction of 3 Miecznik-class frigates.
Poland's determination to modernize and strengthen its naval capabilities comes at a time when the entirety of the Baltic Sea region is becoming more threatened by Russia's provocations. It was only last weekend when 19 Russian drones entered into Poland's airspace, leading to the establishment of the Eastern Century Initiative. This multi-domain NATO initiative serves to underline the collective determination deterrence and defense efforts by the NATO alliance on its eastern flank. And as part of it, the allies have pledged to deliver multiple capabilities. This also includes Danish frigate, which is set to set sail on the Polish-Baltic coastline in just a few weeks. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
25 more political prisoners were reportedly freed by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. That's according to state media outlet Belta. This comes as the Lukashenko regime has jailed yet another Belarusian journalist. Ihar Iliash, who was detained in October last year, has been sentenced to 4 years in prison, Radio Liberty reported on Tuesday. Pardoning the 25 political prisoners comes less than a week after the release of 52 detainees. Most of those freed had been jailed for extremism, a charge the Belarusian regime often uses to imprison dissidents. The previous group was freed following an appeal by U.S. President Donald Trump. In exchange, the U.S. said it would lift some sanctions on the Belarusian airline Belavia. Ihar Iliash, the journalist who just received a 4-year sentence, was charged with discrediting Belarus and facilitating extremist activities, charges that dissidents and independent journalists often face. Earlier, his wife, a journalist for Poland-based independent Belarusian media outlet Belsat, was sentenced to 8 years for treason and is currently behind bars. There are currently over 1,100 political prisoners in Belarus, according to human rights organization Vyazna. Poland's central bank is betting on gold, and the move is paying off as gold prices are seeing one of their biggest rallies in recent memory. At the same time, Poland's currency, the zloty, is also strengthening as the US dollar weakens. Maciej Wilowski has more.
The name of Poland's currency, the złoty, literally means golden in Polish. And like gold, the złoty has had a strong year so far. Poland's currency is trading at its strongest level against the US dollar since 2018. The dollar, on the other hand, has had a rough 2025. That's due to a combination of factors, including expected interest rate cuts by the Federal Reserve and the uncertainty caused by President Trump's trade policies.
So United States is entering the monetary policy easing cycle. This drives dollar down. And this also drives the exchange rate of the dollar in Poland down. That's why dollar is weaker.
Geopolitical uncertainty is also boosting the price of gold, a safe haven asset that tends to move inversely to the dollar. Gold prices are up 40% this year, hitting one record high after another. Central banks, including the National Bank of Poland, are ramping up purchases of the yellow metal. In fact, Poland's central bank has been the leading buyer of gold among all central banks this year, increasing its holdings by 67 tons since the start of 2025. It now holds a total of 515 tons, representing 22% of Poland's foreign exchange reserves. That places Poland among the world's top 10 countries by gold holdings.
The reasons why certain institutional investors accumulate gold is that they fear global inflation and global financial markets volatility. So gold as a physical asset gives you certain protection, for example, against inflation.
As the price of gold surges amid today's uncertain global environment, it seems that Warsaw's bet on gold has paid off. For TVP World, I'm Maciej Wilowski.
On Monday evening, the Polish State Protection Service neutralized a drone operating over government buildings and the Belvedere Palace in Warsaw. But it seems like this time no hostile regime was behind the incident, as tensions in the region remain high. Security services reacted swiftly and decisively. Natalia Komarov explains what really happened.
Once again, Poland made headlines due to a drone incident. Thankfully, this story ends well. On Monday evening, the Polish State Protection Service neutralized a drone operating over some of the most important locations in Warsaw. The Belvedere Palace, where President Karol Nawrocki lives with his family, as well as the nearby residence of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
The people who operated this drone have been identified. It was a young Belarusian and her 20-something friend from Ukraine. These people were directly detained by the officers of the State Security Service.
While police continue to investigate the incident, according to the Polish Interior Ministry, the pair did not act on behalf of any hostile regime.
These are young people. Perhaps it resulted from carelessness, perhaps from ignorance, perhaps from the fact that they wanted to make a film here above the Łazienki Park.
Indeed, the president's residence oversees one of Warsaw's most picturesque parks. So, while everyone in Poland is still on edge after the recent incursion by Russian unmanned aerial vehicles, we recommend double-checking where and when it is allowed to unleash your drone. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And now I'd like to invite you for an exclusive interview with General Ben Hodges, former commander of the U.S. Army in Europe, who I spoke to in Warsaw earlier today, focusing on the current military landscape on the continent, especially in relation to the recent aerial incursions into Polish airspace and increasing risk from Russia. Enjoy. General, thank you so much for joining me here in Warsaw today. So let's jump straight into the questions. Considering the incursion of the Russian drones into Polish airspace last week, how do you assess the response of NATO countries and of Poland? I mean, we've heard that you had some responses about how the whole thing
Well, first of all,
out.
I would not call it an incursion. I call it a Russian drone operation. This was a deliberate effort by Russia to test our responses, our readiness, and to keep sending a message. So incursion sounds almost accidental. Clearly, this was not accidental. The response overall is not good. What the Russians will have learned from this is that we in NATO are still not prepared to deal with what Ukrainians have to face every night. The fact that our response was to send up F-35s, F-16s, when in Ukraine, of course, they're using all kinds of other weapon systems, much smaller, to counter drones. That tells me that we're still not ready for the scale and the speed and the complexity of what Ukraine is facing. But credit to Poland that your pilots had the correct rules of engagement so that they could immediately shoot. That's still not true in many European countries, that they are authorized to shoot. The second positive thing is that the alliance has already started this Operation Eastern Century, and that will provide a framework which will allow increased readiness, increased capabilities. And so, you know, our alliance, our allies are very good at learning and adapting, so we'll get better.
It seems to be the case that drones are the present and the future of combat, but how do you think that drones are actually changing modern warfare as we know?
Well, of course, they're so cheap to make that you can create hundreds. Well, that's what the Russians are using every night, hundreds. And Ukrainians, of course, are using hundreds at different levels. That's one of the things that makes them such a useful system, so cheap, and yet they can go so far, they can do so many different things. That's number one. Number two, it does make it more difficult to conceal capabilities from the enemy. So the best soldiers, the best units are the ones that learn how to operate in that environment where it's much more difficult to conceal yourself. It can be done if you're disciplined, well-trained, good, tough sergeants that make soldiers do the right thing. But if you make a mistake, you will pay a price.
And do you think that Europe is actually doing enough in terms of learning from the experience that Ukraine has in combat with Russia in order to actually beef up and up its own defenses?
I think probably everybody's Ministry of Defense talks about what they're learning from the Ukrainians. But I mean, this war has been going on 11 years, and we still were not ready to be able to shoot down 19 drones. We only got 3 out of 19 after all these years. So no, we are not ready. And I think it's because too many countries are still having a hard time saying that Russia is at war with us. Now, most of the leadership here in Poland does not have that problem. Our allies in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they don't have that problem. Finland, Romania. But as you go further west, and of course, even my own country, the United States, have not made the mental transition to Russia is at war with us. And we have to demonstrate that we are prepared. Now, there was a drone that flew through Romania just a couple days ago after this drone operation against Poland. They didn't shoot it down. So pilots, they have the authority in Romania to shoot it down, but the protocols have not been approved yet. So even Romania, still not ready to do it. So we have a long way to go.
Do you think that technology is actually going to replace human involvement in combat? I mean, we've seen Ukraine actually releasing 18 to 22-year-old men to finally leave the country, to be able to cross the border. Do you think that there's a sort of a shift taking place?
I would not make that connection. Think of drones as a new capability. I mean, we had soldiers were fighting before there were airplanes, before there were tanks, before there were jets. And, you know, these are all new capabilities. So what really matters is how fast we can learn how to exploit that capability, get the most out of it, and protect ourselves from the enemy's use of the capabilities. So and some human functions will be replaced perhaps, but at the end of the day, Poland still has to have good quality women and men in uniform that are smart, that are fit, that are committed, and that can adapt to new technologies.
I'd like to take a moment to look at Keith Kellogg, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy for Ukraine's quote, who said, Russia is in fact losing this war. Now they make movements and say, well, they're advancing in the Donbass region and Donetsk, but if considering advancing, moving by meters, not miles, well then okay, that's successful. But the cost they're having is enormous, and I don't think people truly appreciate it. But what, in your opinion, is the situation on the Ukrainian front line, and how is it going to affect anything that's going to happen in the future?
I agree with everything General Kellogg said. I listened to his statement there. He's exactly right. This nonsense in some media that, oh, the Russians are advancing, you know, they're gaining ground. No, they're not. I mean, Pokrovsk, you know how far east in Ukraine that is. And it's 3.5 years since the large-scale invasion, 11 years since the war started, and they still haven't captured Pokrovsk. Now, of course, Putin does not care how many of his soldiers are killed. It means nothing to him. He will keep doing what he's doing until he realizes, or maybe the oligarchs around him tell him that Russia cannot win. But he will keep doing it as long as he believes that he can win, which means that he believes that the West will get tired. He can already see that the United States is no longer really committed to helping Ukraine. So, but General Kellogg's point is exactly right. And it's not just on the ground. Where's the great Black Sea Fleet? Nowhere to be seen. The Ukrainians, who don't have a ship in a traditional sense, have defeated the Black Sea Fleet. They're not a factor. The great Russian Air Force has destroyed zero trains coming from Rzeszów, bringing equipment and ammunition from Poland and Ukraine. Not one train has been destroyed. In 3 years, not one convoy has been destroyed coming from Poland. That's incredible failure by the Russian Air Force. It's because they cannot fly in Ukrainian airspace. They're terrified of going there. So the only thing the Russians can do is keep killing innocent Ukrainian civilians and keep hoping that we will get tired. If my government, my country's government, and the rest of Europe and Canada would say, it's our strategic objective that Ukraine defeats Russia, that Russia is forced to live inside their own borders, that's the objective. And then we use all of our tools to accomplish that, to include economic tools. Why is Russia still able to export oil through the Baltic Sea as well as the Black Sea? Why are they doing that? If we stop that, and if we help Ukraine continue to attack Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, Russia will not be able to continue the war. Without that oil, the revenues from the oil, they can't do it.
This is exactly what Ukrainians are doing. They're targeting oil depots, which is so important. Yep. Last but not least, I mean, our time is coming to an end, but I wanted to ask you, based on intelligence reports, do you think that we're going to see this conflict spill over Europe in the next few years?
Only if we allow Ukraine to fail.
General Ben Hodges, pleasure as always to have you join us here. Thank you so much, former commander of U.S. Army Europe. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more.